To the Scoop. I'm Farah.
And I'm Nicole.
And is this on? It's on, right?
I think so. I think we're
Okay.
on.
All right. Welcome to our topic today, which is how to advocate for services. It's a parent's guide to authorizations and just advocacy in general. Anything to add there, Nicole?
That's the gist of the topic.
All right. And it's hat day. Nicole didn't wear a hat,
I
so
know, I'm so sorry. I
no.
forget. It's
You're
terrible.
in trouble. So, yeah, we're really pretty passionate about this subject because it really does start with advocacy with families and for their kids, adults, children, what have you, and really becoming a team is how I would like, I think, to start this off is we're definitely advocates, but it's really about empowering parents, right? Or caregivers,
Yeah.
right, Nicole?
hmm
Okay. So one thing I'll just start off with is what is an advocate? And an advocate is a person who publicly supports or recommends a particular cause or policy or passion. In applied behavior analysis, of course, we're really advocating for ABA services. And that can be in the clinic, at home, in the school. I think in particular, we're fighting a pretty hard battle of it being in any other area besides a clinic or a home environment and what that looks like. The law does state, I don't have it right in front of me, that you can do it in the least restrictive environment and where it's needed. I'm summarizing. Nicole, would you say that's about right?
Yeah, and as we get into adulthood, because there's some federal laws that are not followed at like a state level when it relates to age, and then there's insurance plans that don't follow that too.
Ooh, I'm excited to hear about that. Yeah, so it's kind of a gamut of things for when they're younger and they're first diagnosed. You get a lot more support and services and what that looks like. And then in the state of Wisconsin, you're required to go to school at the age of 6. So things change quite a bit once they hit 6, like literally, and we're really fighting for services that can help support in the school and that especially that transition into the school and making them successful, because in the end, then they're successful in the school environment, we can fade out. And I mean, a lot more happens when you have that support and you're able to fade out and kids are able to be more successful. So
Mhm.
anything, do you want to start there, Nicole? Should we start with the school?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, we can start with the school components. So as it relates to authorizations in the school setting, depends a lot on like your insurance plans and at the state level, what they allow and don't allow as far as like your state funding sources, and what environment you are practicing in, which is something that we are trying to, like bridge that gap and also identify that services are needed across environments, and that includes school. And although services look different in a school setting, meaning that we are focused on that not being like a permanent fixture for that individual in the classroom setting, that they don't need a one-on-one in that type of setting for a long period of time. There are some skills and benefits to having ABA in the classroom, such as like working through some of the maladaptive behaviors, creating that behavior plan, making a reinforcement schedule that works within the classroom setting, teaching replacement behaviors in that setting. For example, I have a lot of clients that are maybe in a clinic setting that transition to a classroom setting, and the environment is different. The peer relationships are a lot different. And some of those peer relationships are the things that we can't necessarily like practice in another environment. It really has to be done like in the environment that they're going to spend most of their lives in. And that's the other thing is that ABA isn't something that is supposed to necessarily be long-term, although I can get into a whole nother conversation about how I think it can be. Uh, but as it relates to school, like school is something that they're going to have most of their lives, and they're going to be in that environment most of their lives. So for insurance companies and other like state laws and things like that, saying that you can't practice ABA in a setting that they're going to be in for a large portion of their day and their lives, I honestly believe is ludicrous, because how do you we're an applied practice, and so by saying we're applied means that we are teaching socially acceptable type behaviors, and teaching that like how to live out in the real world, whatever that is for you. And so to say that we can't do that, or it's not warranted, is
Doesn't make any sense.
as us as like a science, doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And you know, we did a podcast, Amelia was on a podcast, and she talked about the Sonnenberg School and how it collaborates, and how we, I mean, this is what you're talking about as far as us working together, because we're not allowed, I don't know, we're just not very welcomed into other school settings. And so to have that crossover and be able to work on those social skills, be able to work on those groups with other kids and the teachers, and being able to have that be successful is what we need. I mean, that's just, in my opinion, it's common sense. Like, you can't just make that up. So we have the environment that can do that. We've created as much as we can in the clinics, but you know, the school is of course, the real deal as far as it's happening live, day to day, week to week, that kind of thing. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's really important. That's kind of where the advocacy comes in for us, and for parents, and for just working together. One thing that I did find, I was kind of just looking around the different types of advocacy, and I thought it was interesting, because you have the self-advocacy, right? Like, you're advocating for yourself. Then you have the individual, which could be a client, could be any age, any practice really, but we're talking about ABA. And then there's the systems. So there's 3 different kind of areas, and they're all very important, because you can advocate for Bobby, right, in the school, and for this particular client for in 6th grade, let's say, and where we want X amount of hours, and whatever. But if we're gonna do more than just one kid and want a system change, then we have to start advocating and getting into changing the systems and what works and what doesn't. And some of it is there. Like I said, and you're going to talk more about age, but when we're talking little, and we're talking even, single digits, there's a lot that the law does support, but it's not really supported. So there's some systems in place, but it's not really happening. So you have to have people that are going to advocate. And sometimes that's us, sometimes that's a family, sometimes that's an outside agency that's coming in and helping to advocate for kids and groups of kids. And I think that's where we're also at. We're kind of hitting the individuals, as we're moving forward to get what they need. And then we're also hitting like the systems and the laws, and like, what, this is in place. Why aren't we actually living this? Or this isn't in place. What do we have to do so we get these kids what they need? Because it only benefits everybody. It benefits society, right? I mean, like, we're a community, everybody, needs to work together, because in the end, I mean, it's money, right? That's what people care about, that are paying out for these services. So that's where ABA is great, because you have that research of, if they get effective, consistent therapy and services, then look what happens. It saves so much money in the long run, because they can live, more independent at various levels. So where you want to go with that kind of talk? Do you want to talk about individuals? Do you want to talk about just school or systems? Where would you think would be a good place for us to?
Yeah, I mean, I think that even as an organization, we started down the path of like individuals, and kind of ran into barriers with individuals, and then realized a little bit more of like the greater picture of like the more and more it happened to the individuals, the more and more we realized that there's a flaw in the
Big
system.
problem. Yeah.
And that's kind of where we're at now, is working on fixing some of those systems. And there's quite a few different components to that we're doing. The first is like the school partnership and being able to service at that level. And not just for Sonnenberg schools, I mean, across the board, and like kind of opening those doors to some of our public schools, because we are a community at the end of the day. And if we don't work together, what's going to end up happening to these individuals is a lot of money spent in residential facilities and homes for them, and a lot of supports as they get older if we don't treat now. And that's where the early intervention comes into play. And it's very, very important, because then we have other problems as we get older. And those resources are much more expensive because you're talking about their livelihood and what they're going to do as an adult, where and I think that another system that's flawed is, instead of providing more services, which Wisconsin does a fairly good job actually with like the types of funding and things they have for adults. Not every state is like that. And now there's always adjustments to everything, but they do a fairly good job, to the point where I do have families move from Illinois, where I'm from, to Wisconsin to receive the type of funding that these adults get in different states. However, if we can't treat in schools and we can't treat like throughout their childhood, we're running into adults that need much more care, where that funding does not support that, because we're running into adults that are going to need a one-on-one type of care, are going to need intensive medical treatments, are not going to be able to live on their own, and there's more of that. So now we're kind of finding this gap in these adults that need significant care, and who's going to do that, and who's going to like be able to afford that.
If you have an adult that needs round the clock care, somebody with them because they're, what does that cost? Do you know what that costs a year, a week, or like do you know, like?
The research that I've done in, this isn't coming from like the state, but like the research that I've done with adults, is that it costs like millions of dollars. So like 2 million, there's studies that say like 1.4 to like 2 million. There's studies that also talk about like how much it costs to raise an individual with autism or another developmental disorder, and how much that costs like the families for their lifetime. And that's upwards of like 14 million. So it's pretty intense. And that's why why my research too is primarily in adults, because if we don't have like vocational skills set up for them, and we don't prep them for the world at younger ages, then we're running into these things where it's a lot of money, and they still don't get the resources, nor do the families get the resources that they need. And it's a lot on the families too, because no one comes up to you as a parent and says, okay, here's exactly what you're going to do for your adult child. No one does that. No one says like, okay, you have to get guardianship paperwork, and here's how you do that. And let me walk you through the steps. Let me tell you why this is important. And that education piece is missing too, because families don't know what to do and what's out there. They kind of like run into someone that knows. With some of the proactive like pieces of that.
So when would you recommend doing that piece? Is that right away when they're in high school? So you start that process of, because it's really programming too, right? You got to know what
Yeah.
you're looking for depending on the individual. And then what is the goal? What do we see when they're turning, between 18 and 21, depending on how long they're in school and how long they're, kind of what services that are provided. What do you say about that for parents and advocating, and where do you go? What do you do for that kind of stuff?
Yeah. I mean, advocacy, in my opinion, never stops, and it starts as soon as you get that diagnosis, as soon as they're born, as soon as you know that they're going to need additional resources or support. So that starts as young as possible, and goes through adulthood, and that doesn't stop. Which is another reason why I think it's so important for our families to have like a support system and to have one another and to be a part of like different groups and things like that, because they need other people and need that like community to like help support them in a lifelong advocacy project, essentially, is what it is, because you are going to fight for everything their whole life. And I know that that's like sad, but that's the reality of what it is. Because I mean, I have families that have clients or children that are like 9, 10 that are planning for adulthood and still
Okay.
don't know if they're going to get
Right.
the resources that they need. But that it starts very young. And that's why we created the life skills programs that we have, because it does really start that young. Um, and then going into like, as soon as they hit school age too, is a whole different ball game, as far as like what you advocate for the school for, versus like ABA.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's got to be overwhelming, for everybody just to begin, so being as proactive as possible, not reactive, is obviously what you want to do.
Mhm.
And so what would you say, I mean, like when I'm thinking about, being an advocate, a parent advocating for their kids and the different areas that we're talking about, um, how do you start that? You know, when I think of ABA in general, and I think of how you're setting your goal, you're setting, like, what's the intent? How do you start? Like, what are you trying to achieve? Um, how would you roll that out, or what would you say about that? Because I think that you have to be very clear on what you're looking for and what
Mhm.
your goal and your intent is, just like we do with everything else, right? In
Yeah.
ABA, like when we're setting our, so what kind of advice would you give for families so they can be clear and focused on exactly what they're trying to achieve, or what route they're trying to go?
Yeah, I mean, I think if the individual is school aged, it's really about I would look into first my rights as a guardian for their education is what I would look at first and foremost. Like, what are
Okay.
my rights related to the IEP and for their overall placement, and what supports are they going to get? Because once you do the IEP, that's something that follows them throughout. And that's usually what I would suggest families to do first and foremost, is to have that, because it is like a legal document that states these are the supports that they need. This is the type of environment they need. And that carries them through at least those like school age periods till like 21,
And
18.
it's live and it's breathing. It's a constant, document that's constantly evolving and changing, and that's your right as a caregiver, as a parent, to be able to revisit or advocate for those goals, and as your child is developing and moving forward. That's what's great about an IEP, is it's living and breathing, and it's one of the best legal documents you can possibly have in the school age.
Mhm.
It's a big, right. That's why you'll see sometimes in IEPs, um, that they can be very vague, or what's the word I'm looking for? Because anything that's in there, you got to make sure you're meeting those goals. And if you're not, you better be explaining why and how you're breaking that up so that they can be met. So, one thing that I would definitely recommend is pushing, because, you know, in setting goals that are going to push teachers and push staff and to make sure your kid is growing and not just maintaining or sitting or being babysat or whatever words you want to say. But they're realistic too. Because that's what I think is great about an IEP. And you should be involved with that and be having meetings and talking through that. And then also doing those things at home too. I mean, as a parent too, you definitely want to be working in different environments. So your own home, your own community, and collaborating, just like an ABA at the clinic or at home, or, you know, parent training, whatever you want to call it. We should all be working on what that looks like so the child is getting consistency. What would you say about that? Is there anything to add, Nicole, for that piece of that?
I mean, as far as like generalization, yeah, making sure that you're working on things in multiple environments and probably with multiple people too. And as far as like the IEP process goes, I think they're like making sure that like there are supports in there that are being used. I've had experiences where you like have a really great teacher and the teacher's doing a lot of things to support your child in their classroom. But if it's not written in the IEP, that doesn't mean that the next teacher has to do
That's a good point.
those types of things. So eligibility is one thing, like, and that has different like rules and guidelines depending on what eligibility they get on an IEP. But then the supports like really matter, those additional supports and anything that is being done in addition to the kind of like regular flow of the classroom. And then if your child requires like a one-on-one, making sure that that's very clearly written in the IEP, because sometimes they'll state that there is like close proximity to another adult, or that they're in like a certain ratio of like a 3-to-1 or something like that. But unless it's like specifically states there's a one-on-one with your child in those areas, then there's not going to be. What they're meaning otherwise is like a EA or like smaller classroom sizes, things like that. And I think the environment is really important. So like if you know that your child requires like a calming room or an area for them to go, just making sure that the school has that, because if they don't have a environment that's suitable for your child, then it's also your right to request placement in another building or school or things like that. So knowing like your rights and what to ask for in the IEP is super important. And there are advocates that you can reach out to that definitely like help with some of that definitely know more than I do too on that. But if, as a parent, if you know it doesn't sound right, then it's not right.
Yeah. You know,
Yeah.
there's a lot of things you can put in IEPs too. Through the years, I've had clients that really did well with certain students or certain, I don't know, there's a variety of things. And there's things that you can also be writing in, depending on, kind of, again, how much you push that. Like we had one kid that really was great with a group of kids, and didn't do well with another group of kids, for a variety of reasons. And so that was literally written right in there. Obviously that can change. Kids can move, kids can, you know, and things like that. But they do that with typical, you know, any kind of peer, behind the scenes too. Like my son, they write in there who we shouldn't be with. They're like, you shouldn't be with this kid. These kids set each other off. They're goofy. They're, you know, so there's a lot, they do that at the end of every year. So that's something that you can do too, is some of our kids, really, it makes a huge difference if they're not with one or two of these peers, and it really makes, I mean, their growth is really affected by that. So I do recommend paying attention to that piece of that, because we do, I mean, that's just something that I think is just very helpful that we forget about too. What was the other thing I was thinking of too? I mean, really anything, but I think, Nicole, you hit right on with teachers do things that aren't in the IEP. And I think that's hitting, or paras, or educational assistants, whatever you want to call them. That also can be a make or break deal as well. And the consistency with that. I've seen schools have two or three kind of switching off, and that sets off kids, and you see different things with that. Sometimes it's good for some kids that they have, some change and generalization, but maybe they're not ready. So those are things too that you can write in, specifically for your child. And again, it can change. You can revisit it. But that stuff really should be noted. And that the teacher really does need to be involved with those kind of things too. But those are questions to ask, as you said.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those are some of the things that I've seen over the years, that have made a big difference. What else? What else do you want to talk about? Do you want to talk about anything with the adults, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think like in addition to, so the IEP is that like kind of legal document that carries them throughout. And then the other piece is the advocacy for like the guardianship, I think would be the next piece of that. So into adulthood, making sure that you are like at least a year before they're 18,
Okay.
looking at what funding, because in Wisconsin, there's about 3 different funders that will carry your long-term support. And looking at those and the benefits to each one of those, because they will have you choose which one you're going to pick. And that carries your adult child through the lifespan, because that's their long-term funding. And each one is slightly different. Like, I know that Iris gives you like a budget, and it's really up to the parent's discretion or the guardian's discretion as to like what that budget is going to be allotted for. But you don't have too much, like, from my understanding, like too much assistance where people are telling you like, okay, you need to do this, this, this. So there's benefits and not to that. The benefit is that you're allotted X amount of money, you know what that is, and you can put that towards like whatever you kind of see like fit for your adult child. Or you can choose some other funding sources that might have different packages. So there's like community care, there's My Choice. So those are like the 3 kind of major ones that we work with as well. And then making sure you'll have a court date for the guardianship. And that is really important, because there are things, it's not like a straightforward, like, oh, you get guardianship or not. There's different pieces, and I don't know all of it, but there's different pieces to the guardianship paperwork where they might have the ability to choose their services and what service providers they want and what therapies they want and things like that. Whereas they might not get to choose like where they like live or if they can vote. So there's some different areas within there that I highly recommend doing that at least a year before their 18th
So
birthday.
setting that a year before, like you're calling, are you calling children's support, or is it the waiver that you're calling?
Yeah, so you're getting, because you're gonna get a caseworker for that. So like at least a year before, getting figuring out their long-term funding and how that's all gonna switch over to long-term. And then also probably contacting like a lawyer or an advocate, someone that could talk you through. Sometimes those caseworkers do have some knowledge on that when you contact them first, and then go through all the guardianship
So
paperwork.
if you can't afford an attorney, is that what advocates that are, yeah. So, so you would contact them, let's say a year before they turn 18, And then how long does it take to set a court date? Is it a whole year? Is it 6 months? Do you know what that looks like?
I think it's kind of different depending on the family, and like who they're communicating with. I mean, I know families that it takes 6 months. I know families that it takes like a full year. I know families that have done it in like have the actual court date set in like 3 months. I'm gonna assume that because things are also related to money, that if you afford
It's
a
always related to money. Follow the
it
money.
always kind of goes back to that. Like that's
Yeah.
probably going to determine your time frame is how much you have to like kind of put towards an attorney or something that could do that process like faster or knows kind of what they're doing. But I think it kind of varies depending
They
on.
have a limit, the long-term support people, do they have a limit on how quickly you can? Can you start at 16? Can you start at those times, or do you not,
I don't I don't think so. I from and this is only going based off of like some of the clients that I service, like when they're
okay,
not 18 yet, is you can't they won't do anything. Like you can maybe contact them, but I think they're gonna have you wait. Like they won't
okay,
do anything if they're 16 or whatever, not yet.
yeah,
They
because then
will
that
start
kind of,
working on it when they're like 17. I know that. But so
yeah,
they
I
might
think,
have some time frames. I'm not exactly sure what they are, but they might have some time frames or guidelines of like, okay, you're 15, so that's great. We're in contact with you, but we'll be in touch at this time.
okay. Yeah, when I had three around the same time, it's been some years. I don't think they could start until there was like a rule of like, I don't know if it was
It
17 or
probably
what it
is.
was, but it was very different for each one. One, I think, was 6 months, one was 9 months, and then I had a family that was really on it and really like calling, and really had it kind of all planned out. So it really, again, is up to the caregiver and on you to make sure you're pushing and make sure you're asking and make sure you're getting those dates, because they will drop it. And there's a high turnover, in the industry. There's some people that have been there a long time too, but there is one time I think we went through 3 people in 9 months. So it's going to get lost if you're not holding, those dates and those times and really making sure that those are being held down. I mean, that's just, unfortunately the way that it is, but yeah, so that's
Well, I
great.
think that's the way anything is, especially as it relates to like, because honestly, if we're talking money, then we're also kind of talking like politics and things, and it really comes down to the louder that you are, the more you're gonna get.
You will.
So the more that you fight, and that's what you'll be
It's
the one that
true.
gets it, I guess. Yeah.
And that's kind of life. I mean, really, if you
Yeah.
think about it, that's yeah. So I mean that I think the more we've gotten and the more we've pushed is, based off of all of that too. So, and you have other providers and things like that have really advocated for a bunch of different stuff, especially with Forward Health. I mean, we've got a big push and we've gotten funding and changes through that, and it's still coming down the pike. So, I mean, like, it does take a village, it does take a community for everybody to come together and be loud. And I really think our community with, autism and other, abilities is a very tight knit community. And, people know people, and, you say, this is what we're going to do, and people show up. So it's really about that community and pushing forward together and advocating as a group, because numbers make a difference for sure.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there's only so far you can get when you're one person, but a group or a community all working towards a common goal is where you're gonna get systemic like change.
Yeah, for sure. Are you frozen or am I frozen? Can you hear me? Uh-oh.
I think it's Nicole.
Oh, it's Nicole. I'm like, because I'm moving. Oh, there you are.
Oh,
You
I'm here
froze.
again.
I was like, are you?
Oh yeah, now it says my internet connection is
I'm like this. Are you there? And there's no answer. Then Carmen goes, she's frozen.
oh, See, because you
Anyway.
guys are frozen to me, but yeah,
Oh, so
then it
maybe.
says, yeah. I don't know where we left off. I was talking about like you only make systemic change in groups.
Yep, yep, for sure. So good. I think that that's all go. Where would you like to go next after that?
Um, I kind of want to talk about like advocacy in like ABA and like those authorizations. That's something we haven't really touched on because like we touched on schools, we touched on adulthood a little bit. The next piece of that is and something that we're kind of working towards as an organization too, is making sure that we can justify the clinically like recommended hours for the individuals that we service, and how parents can help us with that. Some
So the
of our
authorizations,
families, yeah, I mean, some of our families have learned through this process that we're not guaranteed services and we're not guaranteed hours. And there's some things that we could do to like help with that. And we do really need like the families backing for some of this.
so
So
what should they do? And what do
yeah,
you,
I mean, there's been times where we have gotten denials from either denial of hours or denials altogether of services. And the next process to that is going through some like amendments with these providers and going to appeal processes and things like that. So once it gets to appeals is really where we need the family's support and advocacy in that. And I have found that if I am in an appeals process and the family gets involved with that, and whether that is calling their insurance company, writing a letter of their child's needs, meeting caregiver goals is a huge one, and making sure that we're super consistent with how we are implementing ABA practices with our children in everyday life, and what that looks like, and keeping really good like records and data all helps us get the authorizations that we have recommended and know that these clients need. And sometimes it does come down to the support of the guardians, and when that happens, it's mostly working with their insurance providers at that point.
okay,
However, there are some legislation things that we could do with that.
okay. So when you say parents and caregivers involved in, um, some of the things that you were just talking about with goals, how does that happen or not happen? And how do they take data? How do they prove all of that? Where does that go? How does that, you were saying there's a difference when you have parents that are involved in, excuse me, taking data and working on their goals versus not. How does that show up, in your authorizations and in your BIPs and your treatment plans and all of that? Can you explain that a little bit and what's important and how we should prove that? Show
Yeah,
that.
so we start caregiver goals from the very beginning. It's a very important aspect to ABA treatment. It's in all of our treatment plans. It's also in all of our research, determining that the more progress the parent makes, the more progress the individual makes. And so we do take data and records of progress in parent training. And the more progress you can make, meaning the more goals that you meet within treatment, the easier it is to justify that one, ABA is working, two, it can be generalized, right? Three, it's applied because it's applied across like multiple environments and with different people. And ultimately that means that kind of justifies like our services when the families are meeting goals and the individual is meeting goals, which means that we're meeting our goal, which also is that our recommendation of hours is like effective and ABA is effective. And without parent involvement, we can't necessarily prove that treatment is effective. And we also can't titrate out of hours and things like that without it being able to transfer all of their learning, transfer to whatever environment they're going into next.
Okay.
And that's the hard part, is like, we also are required to do transition plans for the entirety of their treatment with us. A lot of insurance companies ask you to do a titration plan or like a transition plan throughout, like as soon as they start. So some of our transition plans are 2 years long, 3 years long, 4 years long, and we have to kind of project out what that's going to look like. And that's really based on what the family is able to do and not do, because when they're not with us, they're in the home or they're in the school. And that's why any caregiver that's going to be treating outside of like a clinic setting really needs to kind of take that treatment and implement that in the environment. We try our hardest, again, to kind of make it like be transferable. Now, some kids are in a more intensive ABA setting where there is a lot of high magnitude problem behaviors that can typically only be managed in like a clinical setting at first, and then like a transfer over. But regardless, the end goal is still a transfer over to a different environment. And so I've had the best luck in achieving not long-term care, because ABA is not long-term, but whatever recommendation I'm making to insurance companies, they've been more willing to provide that recommendation if there is parent progress on goals. Because usually the parent progress and the client progress go hand in
Right. Should
hand.
be. Yeah.
Yeah. And parents that are super involved are amazing advocates, and will also call their insurance companies, will talk to them, will provide letters to them, will like invite them over if they wanted, like they
Yeah.
don't, but
Yeah.
like they're very open as to like, no, like I need this and my child needs this. And so that advocacy goes a really long way. And it might be something really small, and it might take, like we said, a community, right? We might take multiple families calling their insurance company and saying like, this isn't the law, or like, this is like, I am recommending these hours and this is what like I feel is needed and here's why. The more that families do that and push back, the easier it is for others. It might be hard for you, but the more people that do it, it gets a little bit easier.
Well, and would you say that, you can call the insurance company, get somebody that has no clue, and that's part of it too, is making sure you get the person that's going to get it done and keeping their name and getting to them. Right?
Mhm.
Did you say that?
Yeah, like when I go through appeal process, like I contact the insurance company, but I also have the families contact them, and we're both kind of talking to the same person. And most insurance companies, you have like a care advocate, like you have somebody that you can contact. And yeah, it might take a couple like loopholes to get to that person. But I would call and ask like, who is your care manager?
Okay,
Um,
that's good. That's a good advice. Yeah,
yeah.
because you can call 4 different people and get 4 different answers potentially.
Mhm.
So that's some really good advice to get to the person that's gonna, get you the furthest and be consistent. I like that you're both talking to the same person too, because we've had it where you don't, and then it's
Mhm.
like, oh, that's not the guy or woman we want to go to. We want to go to this one. And that's kind of what we're doing too, Nicole, with some of the advocacy work that we're doing with laws and, systems and things like that, is getting to the right person that understands what's going on.
Mhm.
And it's going to make change, because you have to go through so many people to get to the right person. And it can take
Yeah.
so much time and frustration, but don't give up. Push and let's get there. Again, community working together, getting to that next step. I think is just so important. Okay, so I think that's really helpful. what were you saying before? What was the end thing that you were saying? So we were talking about just in general with insurance and the right people to get to, advocating from the beginning. Is there something as a company, so Sonnenberg, working from day one, an intake that we're doing or that we can help to do to move and give more information as I know we're setting goals from the beginning, right? And we're setting that, looking at what this is going to take. I mean, obviously it's a guess because we don't know for sure. There's a lot of different, factors that go into this. Is there something that either families or we can do to constantly be creating that space? Whether that's literature, whether that's, I mean, how often are we having meetings with families? What does that look like? So we can
Yeah, I mean, there's always more to do. I think that we do a really great job at our communication with families. We do have monthly, sometimes like bi-weekly meetings with our caregivers. And that might be due to like updates, that might be like parent mentorship, like it kind of depends. I feel like we do a really great job at trying to have those goals be goals that like is not us creating them for the caregivers, but us creating them together through like what they value and what they need and what they see. Because we are not the ones living with their children, they are. And therefore, it's really important that those goals are made together and that everybody is in alignment with them. So I do think we do really great on that end. I do think we could provide more like parent training pieces as far as like either this podcast, right? Or different like videos and things for our caregivers to learn more about ABA, learn more about like advocacy, learn more about just kind of like what we do and what our kind of like focus is. It gets a little confusing sometimes because we do collaborate with the school, but we are not a school. And so that's really important to note that we are a medical facility. So a lot of the things that we do require collaboration with other like doctors and medical professionals. And that I think could be like more clear. We could do some more communication surrounding the differences between that.
Yeah, I think that's great. That's a good reflection on, always we can do more, always we can be advocating for, I mean, that's what we, from the beginning, and putting that space in there. And really, as we know, it takes like 10 times or something to be repeating it and seeing it and hearing it from this person, hearing it from this person to make it more of a habit and more of a something that they understand, and we all understand. And I think that is a big difference with the clinic versus the school is we are a medical facility. And, I think the way that is a good comparison too, is if you, go into, and as far as titration and just fading out, is if you go in and you get shoulder surgery, right? And you go in there, you get a plan, you get an authorization of like, we're going to have surgery and this is the plan. It's going to take 6 months and this is how we're going to improve as we go. They project that out, let's say 6 months. And then some people it's 3 months, some people it's a year. And it depends on how much you as a person, as a patient, or we'll say client for us, is how much you actually put into it. How much do you practice at home? How much do you do your exercises? How, all that plays into it. And it's the same thing with us in the clinic as far as involvement from families, involvement from, it goes much faster if everybody's doing the same thing and doing their homework and working with their kids, and versus not. Just as if a patient with your shoulder surgery, if you're not doing your exercises, I know somebody that was over a year and they're still going, because they're like, I'm not going to do that. This just hurts and blah, 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 blah. So it's the same thing as far as medical authorization, treatment, all of those things. It's a projection, but it also is a teamwork And it involves a larger, scope of other people too. So doctors and, their pediatricians and, all the different neurologists, medication, all those things we want to make sure. I think that's important too, is medication. If your child is supposed to be getting and is on a certain medication, let's just use that as an example, and then all of a sudden they don't have their medication, we're also going to protect and the environment, your child, our staff, because we don't want people to get hurt too. Is there something on that I think is important, is that we also need to protect our team. And yes, we're safety care trained and things like that. But that's a medical thing too, that really affects a child, right, Nicole? Like, what does
Yeah.
that look like? And what are the rights? I don't want to say rights, but like that communication that needs to occur with things like that too. I think that's really important for us to advocate for that as for the family.
Yeah, medications, I mean, really anything that could like affect their treatment, we really need to consider and come together about, because and be in agreement about too, because there might be times that the ABA treatment stops because of underlying medical conditions, for the reasons you spoke about, because we don't want to do unnecessary harm or disservice to the individual as our client. We also don't want to put anyone in danger, like our staff or like the other clients that we service, because oftentimes they're in like a smaller group setting with us. And we just don't want to continue something that isn't working. And so that's why we take data so much. And that's why it's so important to us, because a lot of decisions are based off of that. And so if we are seeing that something is like declining, we look at a lot of like trends of data. So we don't look at like one instance, like we don't look at one data point, we look at a trend over time. And if we notice that, like, okay, for example, like a client was like didn't display any aggression, and then one day the next like week they're hitting staff multiple times a day, like what, that's a concern for us. We're going to look at, because it was such a big difference. It's not a concern that they are hitting people, that's not a concern for us, that's what we do. It's a concern when the trend in the data is so significant like that, where it goes from like 0 to like 10 a day. That's a pretty big difference to us. And so we do kind of look at that and say, okay, well, what's going on? Like, what are some other variables? And that could be medication, that could be something changed at home, that could be that they're not feeling well. We get a lot of that, like they have a cold, and you'll see like the behaviors go up and down and up. And obviously we can't prevent a individual from getting sick. Like, we're all going to get sick. There's all going to be things that change, right, or alter like in our lives. But it is really important that we're in communication with the caregivers, and we're able to like work together and also collaborate with like outside professionals, because I'm not a doctor. I can look up all the side effects of medication, but I'm ultimately not the one prescribing that medication. And so that's the consult that goes to that doctor to say, here's what I'm seeing. And in order to have that collaboration, you also need to have, it's a group effort. It's the caregivers, it's the other professionals, it's us coming together and looking at that data and like those trends and kind of determining like, okay, what could that be? Which is also why it's really important for us to have a very open and trusting relationship with our caregivers, so that we know what medications they're on, and we know what changes could be affecting behavior.
Yeah, that honesty and open relationship for sure. That's kind of how our values are brought in with each other, that are brought in with the caregivers. It's just really important because it's your kid, it's your, and that's really important to us, that, we do. And that's part of the BACB too. I mean, that's why we have BCBAs over board certified behavior analyst overseeing every single child or client because of those very reasons. You take in ethics, you know, all the stuff that you do because we want to make sure that this is being done the way that it's meant to be in, you know, ABA. So I just think that was worth talking about because it really is, again, that collaboration, that community, and it's even just more than a caregiver and your BCBA or senior supervisor. There's so much more. Some kids have like 7, 8, you know, doctors or different areas because you have neurologists, you have ENTs, you have all sorts of different things going on. So it's really important that we know and we're up to date on all of that because one does, you know, domino affect another, just like for us, you know, anything that, you know, illness or sickness or something's going on, we want to make sure we're communicating that. So it's the same thing. So good. I think that that's really important for that. Okay. So anything else, Nicole, that we didn't touch base on?
I don't think so. I think those are the main pieces there. So I think that's it.
So, so I hope this was helpful. I mean, I think what we're always excited about is to use this as a tool. This might be a really good tool for our families when they're coming in to watch something like this from day one. Again, anyone that watches this and has feedback, we love it. You know, the feedback that what we could be, you know, be talking more about or breaking down. So if you are one of our families and you have some more information or would like some more, you know, a different way or just in general, what can you do? Please let us know. We would love to hear from you. And that pretty much concludes today. Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you.
And I hope that everybody has a good rest of their week. And we'll talk to you all later.